Well, thank you so much, everybody. This is really helpful to see. Just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Christina Clayton. I am one of the co-directors of the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or NHTTC. It's a very long name. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Tough Stuff, LGBTQ Suicide Prevention for Families with Shawna Canaga from Oregon Family Support Network. We did have a session 2 weeks ago on suicide awareness for the same community. And so if you're interested in that, we'll put the link to the recorded webinar later on today. We're just really wanting to start with a land acknowledgement, even though I know we are in a virtual setting. We just want folks to be able to reflect on the lands on which you reside and work, and acknowledge all the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial. We also want to always work for justice in those communities. And in University of Washington, we're in Seattle, and so we're citing the Coast Salish people of our land, and touches all tribes and bands with the Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. If you're interested in the native land site, it's pretty interesting and informative, so we'll put that in the chat as well. A little bit about our network. So the MHTTC network is a nationwide network that's supported by Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. Our network includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian Alaska Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. And these same network structures exist for the addiction and prevention fields as well. And so our MHTTC network supports resource development, dissemination, training, and TA workforce development within the mental health field. There's a lot of crossover, so we all can attend everybody's trainings. We are in Region 10, and so we're covering Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. A little bit about our specific center here in the Northwest. So our goals are the same as for the network: to accelerate the adoption and implementation of mental health related evidence-based practices and other practices, heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills of the workforce, fostering alliances and address training needs among diverse partners and communities, and ensure availability and delivery of free, publicly available training like today. So our area of focus for the network is evidence-based practices for psychosis and other serious mental health issues like that. However, we provide training on a variety of topics and are always interested in your ideas. So please reach out to us if you have an idea. But we work on suicide prevention, obviously, family and peer support, suicide prevention, trauma-informed approaches, and others. We also have a very big school mental health supplement, so that's a whole nother body of work that our center does. And so we do that by offering webinars. We have learning communities. We provide monthly newsletters and other announcements. We have online courses that are all free. So if you're interested in signing up for our events, please do so, and we'll see you at the next one. So this slide is about our hope that our goal in the network is to really use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language. We want to remain mindful of all the different perspectives that people have and that can come up in these events. We just ask that you communicate, in this case during chat, using language that's respectful, non-judgmental, and accepting of all the diversity that's in our community. Some logistics. You're probably used to these things by now. You're muted, you're off camera. This is a webinar. There's now 134 people attending, which is fantastic. We will, and we are recording, so we will share that in a little while, how you can reach that and the slides and other resources. For today, what we are hoping, and also closed captioning, please note that if you want that, you should be able to press the button and get to that, or turn it off if you like. And we will share the video and slides on a product page, and we'll share that. We also offer certificates of attendance, not formal CEUs, but often you can use those to apply. For logistics, we're hoping, and Shawna, I'm sorry I didn't ask this in the previous chat with us, are you wanting to hold questions and have me kind of curate them for the end like we did last week? Okay.
Yes, please.
Great. So that's helpful. There's a lot of activity that goes on in chat, which is fantastic. It also means questions can get easily lost. And so if you can put any content questions for Shawna in the Q&A, that would be really helpful. If there's just comments or stuff you want to share or resource you want to share with the group, please do chat. And if you need help from our team, Gabrielle is in the background, really out there trying to help if there's a tech issue. All right, so evaluation and disclaimer. So SAMHSA funds us, but they obviously have no, details on all of our events. Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for sharing. Is my sound muffled to you, Shawna? How is my sound?
Little bit.
Little bit. I wonder well, thank you for mentioning. This is the kind of thing, and then Zoom is, there we go. Audio. Well, that's
why. Okay, is that better?
Much. Oh my goodness.
Well, you can't see, but I have this fancy microphone, and when I switched my headset, it went back to the little AirPods and not the fancy microphone. So thank you so much, Mary Ann, for sharing. Wow. Underwater, it looked like, oh, wow. Yeah. One time my microphone cut out and I was talking for probably 2 minutes and not seeing the chat. So I'm really glad I opened up the chat to see that. It's virtual life as we have it. But anyway, but what is important is the evaluation. And so we are really, really interested in your feedback. We also want to acknowledge that SAMHSA just changed the feedback form. It's called a GIPRA. Don't explain, I won't bother explaining that. But if you filled out these surveys before, they literally take 1 to 2 minutes at most. But they do ask for a personal code. Before it was 4 digits. Now it's 12 digits. But you know what? This is a one-time event. Put whatever name, letters and digits that you are comfortable with. We just want your actual feedback. So it helps Shawna, it helps our training center to know what you like, what you didn't like. And we don't see your actual, personal information when we get those reports. So anyway, it helps the free training coming. So that also helps. All right. Now to the good stuff. I'm so happy to be here with Shawna Canaga. I'm probably saying that incorrectly. Shawna, could you correct me?
It's Shawna Canaga.
Canaga. Oh, I was so close. Okay, we'll start again. Shawna Canaga is a family support specialist and statewide peer-delivered services trainer for Oregon Family Support Network, or OFSN. OFSN is a family-run organization that promotes mental, behavioral, and emotional wellness for families and youth through education, support, and advocacy. Shawna comes to this position with over a decade of experience supporting youth and families, and with lived experience as a mother of an adult child with complex mental health needs. Throughout both of these journeys, Shawna has cultivated a passion for supporting family-driven and person-centered care within the youth and family serving systems. So thank you so much, Shawna, for being here. I just want to say that I'm so grateful that you're here, Shawna, with us today to talk about the topic of LGBTQ youth suicide prevention for families. And as you titled it, navigating the tough stuff. Yeah. We previously talked when we met last time about suicide awareness for these communities and families. And today we're talking about prevention. I'm wondering, I think I know the answer, but can you try to describe the difference between suicide awareness and suicide prevention?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is such a wonderful question. When I think about, kind of the levels of our work, especially within the LGBTQ community for zero suicide, reduction of suicide, we really have this 3-tiered kind of process or kind of work, right? We've got awareness and prevention, but I want to add on intervention too. And if it's helpful for everyone in the space today, I kind of think of it like this. I kind of think of like awareness, prevention, and intervention are 3 separate houses that live on the same street, right? They're separate houses, but they all work together to make up the neighborhood. And, they have some similarities and they have some differences, some similar structures, some different colors, some different, numbers, but they all work together. So for awareness, we really focus on that general public, general everyone, like, what is the myths and stigmas? What are those risk factors? Where do we get good expert information? And what does this mean, And where we can start asking the questions as families, as communities, as a state, as a nation. Prevention is really the focus that we have as families on what are those proactive things that we can do prior to a potential crisis, prior to potential suicidality, prior to maybe some of those toxic stress moments, to help mitigate when and if those arise. And then, of course, then the other house is going to be intervention, where we put some of those in the moment strategies that we discussed in prevention and set up into action to reduce or eliminate suicide of our young people. So if you picture, it's kind of like trauma-informed care, where we have trauma awareness, trauma-informed care, and trauma, services. It's really those three houses that live on the same street, but they are separate houses.
That's so helpful. I think they can be confusing maybe if you don't work in the field or as you're learning. And, I'm sure there's some doorways between the houses where people go back and forth, and you may find you're trying to do one and then suddenly you're actually in another situation. So I'm glad we're getting to talk about both of these things. So I realize in sort of preparing for our talk today, there was a U.S. Surgeon General advisory on children's mental health last year, and the White House, released a fact sheet around the mental health crisis in our country, with particular attention to youth and all the different risk factors. And I just noted these really startling statistics. In 2020 alone, the U.S. had one death by suicide every 11 minutes for people aged 10 to 34, which is hard to fathom, 10. Suicide is a leading cause of death. And between 1 year of April 2020 to April 21, over 100,000 people died from drug overdoses. So in your view, we're in unprecedented times, and we kind of keep saying that as like the third year continues. How has the pandemic, social media, and all of that changed how youth are affected by suicide, how they are impacted? I'm just curious, because I don't know about anyone else, but, screens have become, we're doing it right now. Screens have become our life. People are really active and getting hurt by a lot of these things. So I was just curious what your thoughts are about how all of these things are affecting youth and suicide risk right now.
Absolutely. Oh, another great question. Let me start with the challenges, and then I want to get to the strengths. Working with youth and families, especially, pre-pandemic, pandemic, and kind of where we are today, some of the challenges that have arisen is really that, increased isolation that our young people are having, and, in particular, our LGBTQ plus youth and young adults, increased environmental access to maybe those who can perpetuate some of those crises, or some of that isolation, or bullying, or violence, or dismissiveness, or non-inclusion. We're all home now, right? School shut down, childcare is shut down, everything's shut down. So, if you happen to be an LGBTQ youth who comes from a home or an environment where it's not very inclusive, it's not accepting, now you are just immersed in that even more, right? And some of the access you might have had to supports, protective factors could have been diminished. Loss and grief, oh my goodness. I know I lost people. I lost friends, families, partners, and so our young people are now isolated in these environments, and also dealing with death and loss and grief. And so we know that trauma is one of the top factors for a risk factor for suicide. And so that definitely has gone up. I have to admit, we're all on our screens, Facebook's in this. It has also increased the connection and access to negative messages about our LGBTQ plus community, right? Yeah. And that matters, right? That filters in. Now, let me go to some of the strengths, though. We have increased our talking about mental health since the pandemic. We really have begun to try, to the best of our ability, reduce this silence and this myths and this, oh, we can't talk about it, right? So the discussion around mental health and suicide has really gone up, and that's a positive in any arena. The next things, our youth are getting super creative about how to reach out and find others, and how families are getting creative. If I can't access this physical space, I'm going to start utilizing my social media. I've done youth panels and family discussions around the use of social media, and they're using it to connect to others. And I think that that is really, really great. And, you know, although Zooms are challenging and media is challenging, it's also reduced barriers.
Right.
I can now speak to youth and families in Eastern Oregon, or in California, or in, you know, Southern Oregon, to where I didn't have that physical capacity to. And so are our families and our youth. They're able to connect with people locally, nationally, and globally for supports and services, and just validation and empathy and communication that maybe they didn't have access to before, for resources or geographical locations. So strengths and challenges there.
Yeah. No, and certainly if we had held this in person, we wouldn't have 150 people from all over the country on our event. So there's always that challenge of reach and, you know, connection. And so I think we're learning how to have connection via Zoom, but it's, you know, it's what we have for some of these experiences. Well, you mentioned something that was sort of my last question. And for those that don't know, we'll put some links into the chat later, but I hope everyone has heard, because it's been in the news, around the new 988, you know, suicide and crisis hotline. So there was a suicide prevention hotline already, but now it's been down to the 3 letters. It offers 24/7 access to crisis counselors for people experiencing mental health related distress, including suicide, mental health, or substance use crises, not overdose. So please call 911 for that. That is not what the 988 is for. But how does this work with, you know, I don't know, it's just launched last weekend. So I'm just wondering, you know, how does this line, in your opinion, you know, start to help, or is it even well known within these communities? And I will say, I was on a regional call yesterday where people are getting a lot of misinformation. And I just really wanted to mention that, because people are hearing the absolute untruths that people call 988 and they're referred to law enforcement. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. That if they are trans or LGBTQ, that they're referred to, you know, law enforcement to be picked up. You know, that is not what 988 is. But I'm just curious, Shawna, how it rolled out in Oregon, how you've heard it's been working, or, you know, what else can be done to provide immediate support to people.
Absolutely. So I will validate, I am not a content expert on 988, but we are immersed in kind of that rollout and the information giving, and really helping people navigate what is going to be the best support and services for my situation. So as far as I understand it right now, number one, yay, 988, so much easier than like the big, huge numbers. I love that it is easily memorable. It's accessible. It's, you know, as somebody who really likes neurobiology, I think this is a great thing. And with that, I think it's also really important to know that that is still a transferred number to the National Suicide Hotline. Right. And for Oregon, then that gets transferred to Lines for Life. And so, you know, I'm not quite sure where that would go in other states for people who are in the space today. So it's still the same resource, just a different street to get there, right? A different way to get there. And with that being said, I think it is going to increase access no, I have to use and there's still work to do. When we're speaking about our LGBTQ plus youth and young adults, I think as we are rolling this out and more calls are going to come in and more people are going to reach out for support services, health, wellness, healing, recovery, there still has to be a focus on the cultural responsiveness to our LGBTQ plus youth. Yes, we might have trained responders, but are they specifically trained in
Right.
LGBTQ, plus community supports, resources, needs, and experiences? Whether it be the National Suicide Hotline, whether it be Lines for Life. So I think that is still an emerging area we need to do. This is where I tend to kind of lean on the Trevor Project crisis line, where we
Right.
have those
Yes.
content experts for that community.
Yeah.
I mean, especially with our trans youth and our trans youth of color, there are very specific barriers, very specific strengths, very specific challenges that need to be addressed. What I am more hopeful for and more excited with is legislation around, especially in Oregon. I'm unsure about other states, but in Oregon, the rollout of mobile crisis
Right.
in every county, not just isolated counties, but a mobile crisis for every county. I think that is going to have some of the biggest impact. And once again, if we want true cultural humility, true cultural responsiveness, whether it's 988 or mobile crisis, we need specific training for specific diversity, equity, and inclusion with the populations we serve.
Right. Well, I know we could talk all day, and I appreciate taking a little extra time around this particular issue, because I really want people to be informed. I think I'm also not a content expert on 988. I'm trying to understand, but it is, like you said, something that already existed. It's a simplified number. Some states have implemented things to fund additional things that go along with that. Others haven't. But yeah, the misinformation, that's what I heard from each four states in our region. And it's too bad. But it also probably isn't the magic wand. But I hope people know that it is there. It was there before. We're still wanting to make sure we're serving folks and letting people know about it. So I will just thank you so much, Shawna, for talking about these issues, and also bringing up the other resources, because I think those are really important as well. With that, I thank you for your insights and for what you do. If you haven't seen Shawna, and heard from her before, I'm just so glad that you are here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
I will let you take it away from here.
All righty, everybody, let me get my screen sharing up here. And we will dive into content, and we're going to probably go through the content pretty swiftly. That way we can have some time for questions, answers, community learning, all that awesomeness. Let me get this going. But may I start with welcome to Navigating the Tough Stuff, family suicide prevention for those of us within the LGBTQ plus community. As Christina said, my name is Shawna Canaga, and I am the peer workforce trainer for Oregon Family Support Network. And for those of you who might be new to Oregon Family Support Network, we are the Oregon chapter of the National Federation of Families. So we get the honor and the privilege of doing educational series, empowerment, advocacy, legislative awareness, as well as providing peer-to-peer services for families raising youth with complex needs. But above and beyond that, I am the parent to my daughter, who lives with complex mental health and behavioral health challenges, who is part of the LGBTQ community. And one of the reasons that I'm here with you today and so passionate about this topic is that my daughter, and with consent, has allowed me to say, lives with chronic suicidality, which is vastly different than acute suicidality. And so this has really been our journey in our life since she was really young. She's an adult now, but we still walk the journey. And so many of the things we talk about not only are going to come from evidence-based practices, but they're going to come from practices that have shown evidence, right? For families, for young people, for those within the community, and how we all can kind of navigate that together as families. So this is the second module that was created. The first one was suicide awareness for LGBTQ families. And if you get a chance, we do have that recorded, where we really kind of dived into the risk factors, content experts, and just a lot of those different areas around raising awareness to start the journey of communication and work towards prevention. So today, what we will be doing is really briefly, this was honestly, this was a 3-hour class that we put together for parents, caregivers of LGBTQ plus youth. And it was designed as kind of a support group module where we all were going to get together, share information, education, but really sit in community together. So we're going to take that 3-hour and we're going to condense it down to hopefully about 45 minutes. So within that 45 minutes, we will talk about suicide prevention from the family perspective. You know, how can we build protective factors, prevention, strategies and supports to help get ahead of the potentiality of a suicide crisis, right? We're going to just do a quick risk factors review. We will look at protective factors for families as a prevention strategy. That will be most of our time today. And really at the end, kind of identifying how we can practically build those in day-to-day life as families to help our LGBTQ plus community, our young people, our young adults, in really being able to build those prevention strategies. So I do like to just mention a couple things before we get started. There might be some new language, some of you might have heard, some of you might not, but I like to just kind of say, in case anything sounds a little different, these are some of the language that I use. One of the things in particular, especially as a trauma-informed care trainer, I use the word activations. I don't use the word triggers, and for a variety of reasons, and especially when the community has identified that that language really brought up some negative pictures or activating pictures or memories. And so if you hear activations, it might be the same word you've heard of triggers. Another thing is when we talk about suicide, you'll hear me say died by suicide, death by suicide. I won't use terms like committed suicide. We're really meditating on and aware of the need to disconnect the act of suicide or deaths by suicide from language that might be connected or correlated with committing a crime, right? When somebody commits a crime and they use the word committed suicide, we really want to kind of separate that, because what we know is that people who die by suicide, they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't commit a crime. They were in exceptionally deep pain, right? Deep pain. And also that this is a really sensitive topic for many of us. Many of us might be survivors of someone who died by suicide. We might have navigated in our professional world supporting people with suicidality. And so I just want to validate that this can bring up feelings, this can bring up activations, and please throughout this time, take care of you. Take care of you so that we can keep this as productive, as safe of a space as possible for our ongoing community learning today. So before we dive in, just a quick acknowledgement that especially if you live, work, right, or are part of any suicide conversations or councils or family navigation, that together that we stay mindful that even with the best education, even with the best supports and services, even with the best family support, even with the best language, research, data, that people die by suicide, right? And I think that's a heavy backpack for many of us to wear, especially if you're a parent or a caregiver who walks this journey or has walked this journey or has lost a child by suicide. But just really to just sit in this acknowledgement that if this is part of your journey, I know that backpack, I know how heavy it is. I know that we question ourselves on, could I have done more? Could I have seen more? And I just want to validate that it's not your fault. You did the best you can. And sometimes people die by suicide, but we do want to work as hard as possible to prevent them. And that's hopefully what we can do today together. All right, so let's do a quick review of some stuff that we had in awareness. Some acknowledgement of some risk factors for our young people and our young adults, and really just suicide risk factors in general. what I'd like to start off with saying is that risk factors do not equal death by suicide. Okay. Risk factors really are that elevation of risk, right? And so being mindful that these are areas that we want to continue to be aware of, but not be like, oh my goodness, somebody has a mental health challenge, so that means they're going to try to die by suicide. Somebody is part of the LGBTQ plus community, that means they're going to try to die by suicide. We just want to be able to have that heightened awareness and that heightened lens. I kind of like to call it my spidey senses, those red flags of certain communities and certain situations where somebody might have a challenge around wanting to die by suicide, thinking about dying by suicide, attempting to die by suicide, or dying by suicide. So, having a friend, a family member, or a hero die, right? Bullying, a prior attempt is a high risk factor. We talked about earlier how trauma is going to be one of the top risk factors, right? Experiencing trauma. And we know many of our young people and our young adults in the LGBTQ community really have experienced extensive amounts of trauma in their homes, their communities, their schools, their places of work, their spiritual communities. And so this is a big one, right? Age. The age of people is a risk factor. You just heard Christina talk about how it's the first leading cause of death for people 10 to 34. We also know that the senior population is another age factor that's at risk. Recent loss of someone, that so connects to the pandemic, right? Chronic health conditions, etc. This is not an extensive or exhaustive list, but just really to start to get you thinking about what are some of these areas that we should really have a little bit more awareness about when it comes to working on prevention plans. So I want to talk specifically about our young people and our young adults in the LGBTQ community, and just some risk factors specific to them, right? And to their community. So the increase in depression and anxiety from a variety of reasons, right? That we just talked about a minute ago. That dual stigma of being part of the LGBTQ plus community and of suicide in general, right? In the awareness class, we talk about how young people in the LGBTQ plus community are at 4 times higher risk of death by suicide and attempts with suicide than their straight peers. Then you add on mental health challenges, that's 5 times more, right? And so this dual stigma of the LGBTQ plus community and suicide is really big. The increase in houselessness, especially for those who would be rejected at home, kicked out of homes, that is a reality, okay? One of the things that I think is exceptionally important that I want to spend a second on is barriers to culturally appropriate mental health and physical health care. In particular, our trans youth and our trans youth of color. Having culturally appropriate mental health providers, culturally educated mental health providers, culturally appropriate physical health providers, and culturally educated physical health providers for our LGBTQ plus community. This one's really big. Discrimination, which really manifests as that rejection, bullying, violence, okay? This all stems not only from our micro communities, but from our macro system as well. Somebody just put in the chat a bit ago about how, the pandemic, it's also around laws and policies that have really infiltrated our LGBTQ plus community. And, that's affecting them. They're hearing it. They are a part of it. They are navigating this rejection, this bullying, even when it's in a macro system. Lack of support, body image challenges, those laws and policies that perpetuate inequality. We see that within not only the national level, but we're also seeing it on our local levels, school board discussions, curriculum discussions. Again, laws that are policies that have inequity in support and service cares. And then isolation, feeling isolated from the general community, or having inequity in the general community of just to be who you are. My daughter and I have had many conversations, and some of the conversations that I've had with her and with other youth in the community is really just this validation that it's not just physical isolation, it is social isolation, to where they say, I'm scared to even walk down the street and be who I am, right? That can be a life risk for me. That can be an emotional risk for me. That could be a health risk for me, right? So again, it's not just that physical isolation. It is also the community isolation, the social, the cultural isolation that our young people are experiencing. So let's move forward into protective factors work. I'm going to check the chat here real quick just to see if we have any additional great knowledge. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about what families can do to help build protective factors as a prevention strategy for suicide, right? And suicide is complex. There are many, many, many things that we can do, but today we're going to focus on protective factor building, right? As a parent of a child in the LGBTQ community, and as somebody who's a parent of a child with chronic suicidality, and also as a provider to others who are navigating the same challenges, this protective factor work really can be part of the solution, part of the strategies in supporting young people who might be at risk for suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and/or death by suicide. So let's talk about these protective factors. What are they, right? So protective factors really are that combination of skills and supports and strengths within the individual, the families, the communities that can help to reduce the risk of suicide within our LGBTQ plus communities. We're going to talk about some general protective factors, and then we're going to talk community specific protective factors for our LGBTQ plus youth, right? So these can really help us in balancing and in preparation for mitigating some of those, again, that risk of suicide. They're going to help us in areas of concern for our youth. And some of these, are kind of basic, right? But we're going to talk about how they actually assist in working towards reducing suicide for our LGBTQ plus youth and young adults. So some protective factors that can help us, that we can build for our LGBTQ plus community in general, right? For our youth, strong relationships with friends and family. Strong relationships with friends and family. I have had the privilege of having someone in some of my other trainings, and they were at the awareness training, and I believe I saw them in the chat, and then they're here again today in this training. And they said so eloquently that accepting and supportive parents, caregivers, and friends is absolutely crucial to our LGBTQ plus youth, and in particular our trans youth, right? And how that is such a strong protective factor as they navigate maybe some things that they don't have as much control over out in society and in the world. Community and school supports, right? Building those within your school systems, your educational systems, your community systems, your nonprofits everywhere. Allowing and having access to LGBTQ plus communities, different organizations where our young people can have connection with other young people as well as adults within their community. Isolation is such a big factor in suicide risk. And so when you are able to have representation, when you are able to have connection to people within your own community, that can be an extreme protective factor and really help to kind of buffers some of the other challenges that our LGBTQ youth face. This one I think is really important, and I really want you to pay attention to the word accessible, okay? Accessible and non-discriminatory mental and physical health care. And why am I focusing so much on accessible? Well, first, I want to acknowledge that for those in the LGBTQ plus community, access to people with cultural knowledge, with LGBTQ knowledge, with those support services and strategies is immensely beneficial, and I want to validate, immensely hard to find in many communities, especially if you're in a rural, right, community, somebody with that increased knowledge and that increased support and services. So that is really big. What I really want to talk about is the accessible piece too. And this I talk about in general terms with mental health, but definitely as we speak to the LGBTQ plus community, accessible means being able to use it, right? I can have an insurance card in my wallet all day, every day. But if I can't access and use that support, then it's worth nothing, right? So even working towards reduction in copays, reduction in deductibles, and accessibility when it comes to maybe mental health supports and services. We had somebody say, hey, one time, I accessed counseling, I was allowed 8 sessions and they told me, sorry, you're out of sessions, right? Then that's not accessible to people, okay? If we can't financially use it, if we can't geographically use it, and if we can't get the supports and services when we need it, where we need it, at the time we need it, it's not accessible. Okay. The next thing is also around schools. In my community right now, this is kind of a big deal, really integrating those policies and programs, procedures, and actions that ensure that our LGBTQ plus youth feel safe, and not only feel safe, are safe. Okay, so really working within the school boards, the curriculums, trainings for our educators, for our administrators, that help to promote, perpetuate, and put into action policies, procedures that help our students be safe, feel safe, okay, in the school environment. Another protective factor is cultural beliefs that discourage suicide. This is not just spiritual cultural beliefs, but just cultural beliefs in general, right? If you come from a culture where suicide is a discouraged action, then that can help support a young person within that community. Positive role models, representation matters. Seeing others like you who have overcome, who have succeeded, who have, additional wisdom to give, right? Really, really wonderful. And the one we're going to focus on here in a little bit too, but I'm going to bring it up right now, is that having your basic needs met, right? Housing, clothing, financial security, food, transportation, identification documents in your preferred way, right? All of these things, these basic concrete supports, which we're going to dive into here in a second, are a huge protective factor, okay? A huge protective factor. So here are the protective factors for families and areas that we're going to talk about that we can grow in as a family. What I really want to focus on and let y'all know is that when I talk about family protective factors, I'm talking about the whole family, right? This is not something we put on our LGBTQ youth or young adults, and it's not something we just put on parents, caregivers, forever people, right? This is the whole family, because what we do know is that, it's like a ripple effect. When we have suicide challenges or mental health challenges or any kind of challenges within the family, it affects the whole family. So this is about doing it together. This is about the family community, the family unit, and building that family unit's resiliency. And we're going to talk about resiliency first, because resiliency is something that is built upon the 4 protective factors below it. Resiliency is built upon social connection, knowledge, concrete supports, and emotional health. So I really want you all to kind of meditate on what is this resiliency? How do people become resilient, right? We're not born resilient. We become resilient through challenges and getting back up and overcoming and new tools in our toolbox, and how resiliency can be connected to suicide prevention for youth and families. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of give a quick description. Resiliency, it's really that capacity for the ability to cope successfully in the face of change, risk, adversity, right? It changes over time. It changes over time, right? We build resiliency over time. But the really phrase that pays here is that resiliency is enhanced by the protective factors we just looked at a second ago. And we're going to go through each of those one by one, right? Those protective factors being built in the environment, in the individual, and within the family helps us be more resilient in times of adversity, risk, toxic stress, trauma, mental health challenges, spirals, and yes, even suicidality, right? So again, it's a learned process, right? And just think about all the times you've been resilient, right? It can be something as, bouncing back from a fender bender, out in my local street, to overcoming and really getting on roads of recovery, mental health recovery, addiction recovery. It can be overcoming a relationship challenge. It can be many things, right? But it's that learned process of getting back up again and again and again, even when facing difficulty. It is strengthened by relationships and a sense of connection to others. I say in some of my other classes, I don't care if you look at trauma-informed care research, addictions research, mental health research, positive youth development research. Some of the top tiers of protective factors you could cultivate in any human being is a connection to another positive adult, someone who cares about you, someone who believes in you, somebody who wants your best, right? That is powerful, because that connection and those relationships build hope. Hope helps us move forward to a life of health, wellness, and well-being, okay? And it helps us increase our strengths. So let's talk about then, how can we build that resiliency? What are these protective factors and how do they connect? So the very, very first one we're going to talk about is social connections, right? Because we just talked about relationships and how relationship and the connections to others is vitally important when it comes to a protective factor for our parents, caregivers, forever people, our siblings, our children, and our LGBTQ plus youth community, right? Connections to others. So really meditate on, and if we were together, we would do an activity with this, but really meditate on, what does social connections mean to you? Where do we find them? Can you think of in the box and out of the box social connections? And how do social connections really connect to suicide prevention? So, for time's sake, I want to just talk about a few, right? Because one of the things sometimes when we talk about the protective factor of building social connections within families and youth is that we focus a lot on, go to a hobby group, or, maybe your local faith community or a sports team or this or that. Think out of the box too, because one of the things that I think is exceptionally important when it comes to any protective factor work within your own family, if you're here as a parent, caregiver, forever person, or the families you support, if you are here as a provider, is culturally appropriate and cultural humility within what is appropriate for your family or the families you support. We need to be thinking about physical ability. We need to be thinking about financial access, geographical access, cultural considerations, right? Developmental considerations, mental health considerations, disability considerations. So for some of us, social connections, I have supported people in their entire social connections on the internet, right? Their friends, their community is in Australia and Europe and China, right? Canada. For a variety of reasons, they do not socialize externally from their home. So we build those connections within technology, right? The internet. For some people too, their social connection is their pets. How many of you in this space have a pet that absolutely brings you joy, increases your serotonin, increases your endorphins, and would be like, if my pet, I have a big old 20-pound Himalayan male kitty here. It is my social connection. It is my beauty, my love. You know, I could talk about my cat forever. But really thinking in the box and out of the box, volunteer work, right? Again, gay straight alliances, PFLAG communities. That's what we have in our community. We have different agencies and organizations that are specific to trans youth, getting together, connecting together, making sure that we have connection to something outside of yourself, right? Connection to something outside of yourself. And I really want to encourage you all in this space today, think out of the box. Think out of the box, okay? The next one we really want to talk about is knowledge. Where do we get knowledge? Why is knowledge such a huge protective factor, right? How many ways can we gain knowledge? How many of you get knowledge from TED Talks and documentaries and yes, even social media, right? Instagram, maybe the news, books, brochures, one-to-one conversations, trainings. Oh my gosh, I mean, we could go on and on and on and on and on. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power, okay? And when I'm talking about knowledge, I'm talking about the whole family. Expert knowledge on suicide. Okay, so we're talking like NAMI, the Association of Suicidology, Trevor Project, National Suicide Prevention Line, right? These aren't just crisis lines for me. It's also places you can gain knowledge. We need to be gaining knowledge about the barriers, strengths, challenges, and successes of our LGBTQ plus community, okay? And sharing that knowledge. You know, even I saw a post yesterday that really hit me and it really affected me. And somebody put a post up that said, are you really challenging your growth in knowledge and education about gender norms, non-binary youth, and you know, are you really gaining knowledge about this, or are you just collecting new pronouns? Right? Knowledge is different, right? Knowledge affects consciously and unconsciously the things we seek, supports, services. It will affect how we approach things. You know, like I said, my daughter lives with chronic suicidality, and I didn't understand that at all. At all. You know, I was caught in the parent cycle of this person's just seeking attention. They're just crying wolf. They talk about it all the time. It's just drama. It's just this. It's just that. And somebody gave me the protective factor of knowledge and really worked towards helping me understand, what is this mental health challenge? How does it affect the brain? How does it affect behavior? And how is it even connected to, differences within youth culture and differences within people, right? And that totally changed how I saw things. Totally changed how I saw things, especially within the realm of trauma, right? Because many times what you see is not what you think you see. And gaining additional knowledge about mental health, about suicide, about the LGBTQ plus community helps us to navigate some of these situations, crises, and challenges better if and when they arise, right? So I always say in all these trainings, whatever you learn, give it away. Whatever you have absorbed, give it away. Give it away, right? Knowledge is power and it can change lives. And really, again, find diverse ways that people can gain knowledge, okay? So then one of the areas I want you to see, and these should be within your handouts that were accessible on the website when you registered. Some of my go-tos when it comes to knowledge, especially around this particular community and topic within families, is there's a great document from the National LGBT Health Education Center on suicide risk and prevention for LGBTQ plus community people. There is also, especially for my families here, the parents' influence on the health of lesbian, gay, and bisexual teens. I would increase that to all of our LGBTQ plus youth and young adults. And one that is really, for me, impactful was the knowledge, training, and additional education by the Family Acceptance Project. We can't dive into a deep discussion about family acceptance, especially when it's connected to spiritual cultures, etc. But I really, really want you all to hopefully dive into the Family Acceptance Project. Some of your handouts for knowledge speaks to how can we raise some of these protective factors if you are within maybe a non-conservative kind of mindset culture, and they also have one for more conservative mindset culture perspectives lenses, right? Because we all can still support love and help our youth, right? Because at the end of the day, we want them to be healthy, successful, happy, safe, right? All of our youth. And there are ways that we can do this. There are, I could talk about this forever, but really check out the Family Acceptance Project and dive into it. I wasn't quite sure about it when it was introduced to me, but I'll say from a personal parent perspective, it really was enlightening. It really, really was enlightening. You know, what can we do? All right. Oh, sorry. I love in chat. Some people say, yes, I love my fur babies, right? Connection to something outside of you. Okay. So then we also want to take a look at the concrete supports. Sometimes this one gets a little overlooked because it's kind of like, you know, those Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But really concrete supports can help with that buffering. Remember, we talked about resiliency is helping with that buffering when challenges, toxic stress, trauma, and these crises might arise. So concrete supports are really, like it says, those concrete, tangible supports for youth and families. Housing, clothing, food typically come up, but think beyond that. How many of you in this space today could acknowledge that childcare is a concrete support for families, right? Helps you be more resilient in times of stressors, challenge, trauma, toxic stress. How many of you believe or could validate that identification documents are young people and are, you know, young adults having social security cards, birth certificates, right? Identification cards, tribal IDs, right? All these things are going to be so important. Transportation. This day and age, Wi-Fi, computers, cell phones, right? One really hit me the other day, a place to receive your mail. You know, not everybody has a mailbox or a PO box. Can be a concrete support, right? And really, when we start taking care of our basic needs, our life needs, the things that help us get through every day a little bit better, and even those things that sometimes we take for granted and we don't think about, right? These can help you to be more resilient. One of the things, you know, I try to talk about is like, you know, for me, having the concrete support of an insurance policy, an insurance card, the knowledge about knowing what to do if I get into a fender bender. I have social supports. If I can't drive my car, I can call my mom, I can call my friends, I can call my sister, right? All of those connected concrete supports are going to help me be more resilient in that moment of challenge when somebody hit my car. Okay. I just want you to kind of like connect these to that practical level. Okay. Knowledge, concrete support, social connections do help us be more resilient in times of challenges. Okay. For our LGBTQ youth and young adults, this is so important, right? it's really, really, really hard to focus on wellness, health, recovery, and resilience when you don't have a place to live, when you don't have access to food or warmth or your proper identification documents and your proper names, right? The way you wished it to be, or access to supports and services, or access to concrete supports of mental health and physical health care, right? It's really hard to walk roads of recovery and walk roads of wellness when your basic family needs are not being cared for. And the same for our parents, caregivers, forever people, and the whole family in general, right? When our concrete supports are met or built, we have more balance to address potential crisis if and when they arise, okay? And the very last one is around emotional health. And emotional health sometimes can get a little confusing, but what I really want you to think about is what are some of those components, those characteristics, those behaviors that help us to be as emotionally healthy as we can be. A couple examples. How many of you think that having healthy boundaries is an emotionally healthy practice? Saying yes when I want to say yes, no when I want to say no, right? Having a locus of control, having positive coping strategies, having individualized self-care strategies, right? A sense of optimism more than pessimism, right? We could go on and on and on. But really, what are some of those components to your family building your emotional health? Or if you're here as a provider, helping your families build emotional health, helping your young people build emotional health so that they are more resilient if and when challenges, toxic stress, or crisis may come, right? I got to tell you, the being able to say no and yes was a huge life changer for me, right? To be able to kind of balance my needs and my family's needs and my daughter's needs, being able to look at the individualized nature of mental health care, the individualized nature of health and wellness, the individualized walks for self-care and regulation. So important, okay? So really think about how emotional health connects to preparing for that suicide prevention, right? Because the more prepared we are, the more resilient we will be in times of challenges. You know what, before we go here, I just want to pause for a second and I want to give you all just a kind of a picture. So I can't see everybody, but if you feel like putting it in chat, go right ahead. So I want to make sure this is culturally relevant to the best of my ability. Is how many of you have ever been to a circus, or you've seen a circus, or you know of a circus, right? The circus. And if that connects with you, I really want you to think about like a tightrope walker at a circus, and what helps them to the best of their ability be safe as they're kind of walking that tightrope. It's a net, right? Underneath them, it's a net. The net's not going to be very helpful if it's only one rope. Not going to be super helpful if it's 2 ropes. Really not going to be helpful even if it's like 5 ropes, right? For a net to be helpful, that tightrope walker needs multiple ropes connecting to make a strong net underneath them in case they fall, right? So that if they do fall, they're going to bounce back. Really try to picture protective factors like a net under your families or under your family, okay? Because as you are walking the tightrope of life, or as your families are walking the tightrope of life, sometimes we slip, sometimes we fall. And I want to build the strongest net underneath my family, underneath the families I support. I want to build the strongest net under my daughter as possible, because if and when she slips off that tightrope of life, I'm going to know she's going to bounce back. Might still hurt, might not be comfortable, might still be hard, but that net underneath her is going to help her to bounce back when it happens. So really think about in your life, if you're here as a parent, caregiver, forever person, hat, or as a provider, please go build nets. Go build nets, right? Concrete supports, social connections, knowledge, emotional health ropes, connect them together and really help people bounce back, especially for those of you who are here in a professional provider capacity, because, truth bomb, someday you won't be there with those families. Someday the case will end. Someday the wraparound process will finish. Someday they'll move. And I really want to hope and that I know that I helped build strong nets for when that time happens, where they are on their own, facing it on their own, doing it on their own, because it is their own family. Okay? So go out and build nets. All right. So let's finish up. And again, part of that emotional health piece really is the self-care piece. We talked a lot about this in the awareness class. I just wanted to reiterate before we kind of wrap up this section around that good self-care practices, and we're talking daily. And I'm very passionate about self-care not being the fluff and the fun. It's not all about manicures and pedicures and vacations and dinners and movies, right? Sometimes it's just the practical things we do to help ourselves stay in balance. Some of my self-care strategies is getting off the couch and doing my dishes, because I know if I don't, I'm going to have anxiety tomorrow, right? It's staying connected. It is all these different individualized things that I do to help stay kind of that teeter-totter, keep the teeter-totter in balance, right? Because if and when a challenge comes up, I have made a body, mind, spirit, energy habit of being as balanced as possible. So self-care really does matter for you, for your children, right? For your family. Some specific ones I really like. I absolutely love this particular diagram from the Trevor Project. And if you are new to the Trevor Project, please check them out. And if you have additional resources, please put them in the chat. I think we had one for the trans line and some more. So please add those in. But I really want you to check out some of these self-care strategies for our LGBTQ plus young people and youth, right? How can they help to keep their teeter-totter in balance at home, help to keep their teeter-totter in balance at school and out in the public, right? And here are some wonderful ideas, spending time with nature, identifying your feelings, right? What emotionally healthy thing to do, to be able to recognize, identify, and articulate how you are feeling, okay? Doing an activity that brings you joy, seeing a mental health provider that's culturally appropriate for you, all sorts of observing what's positive around you. So really take some time to look over this and see how it can be incorporated into your family or into your young person's life, right? We can't change everything in homes or even outside of the homes right away, but helping our young people and our young adults in the LGBTQ community be prepared to help themselves stay in balance, to build their own protective factors, to handle those challenges and crises when they might come to the best of their ability, can be a huge strength. Okay? I want to show you one more thing, and that is really around helping you start the process of what do you want to build? What kind of protective factors can you build in your family to help with being more resilient if and when suicide challenges may arise? And if you're here in a provider capacity, what can you help families build, right? What are some of those knowledge areas? What are some of those concrete support areas? Where can I go for expert information? And I want to show you a document here real quick that might be helpful. It was helpful in my family. And for some of you, it might be helpful. And it's really this protective factors family prevention form. I like pictures, so I like things color coded and I like them to kind of have different diagrams with them. But it's really this document to help us maybe sit down as a family or sit down as a provider and do a little bit more of a deep dive into what are some of these protective factors we can build And how is it going to support you in a suicide prevention plan for your whole family? So you'll see here, and there were some examples I put in. What are some social supports I want to build or use in my prevention plan, right? So one example is I'm going to build more connection with Grandma Kelly so that they can sit with my other child as I help my oldest child in addressing maybe a crisis concern. Knowledge that I want to build. You know what? I want to know more about suicide risk factors because this information will help me be more aware of the risks my LGBTQ child is facing. Okay. I want some concrete supports to build. Maybe I'm going to work on increasing my savings. How is this going to help my prevention plan? For me, this is going to help me feel less stress in times of need, where maybe I have an unexpected expense or need to take some time off from work to address a crisis or toxic stress moment. Okay. What are some providers and services in my area to include in my prevention plan? I included the text line, the teen text line. It's going to be a resource for my youth to use when feeling overwhelmed so they can navigate that health and wellness. Communication starters we can use to talk about suicide, right? We know talking about suicide is a huge protective factor for families, and daily self-care strategies section, and resources for more information about youth suicide. One example here is maybe taking a youth mental health first aid class, right? Help me gain more knowledge and skills around prevention and intervention strategies, right? Because intervention strategies is next for my youth who might be in crisis or thinking about suicidality. So if that's helpful, I believe that is available on the webpage at MHTTC, all of these documents, but it's just a great way to start opening up a conversation, opening up planning, opening up dialogue and work around how do we build these protective factors? How do we make strong nets? So let me take this off here and go back to our slide. So that, my friends, is our very fast 45-minute youth or family suicide prevention for LGBTQ plus youth and young adults. I just want to thank you so much for being here, for caring about this topic, for spending your morning with me, for being a part of the health wellness support of our LGBTQ plus youth and young adults. May you all go forth, do good works, love on people, and we hope to see you at the learning communities coming up and starting the 27th.